So we bought a new boat last year with a conventional marine head with a 40-gallon holding tank and a seawater flush. It had been meticulously maintained, but it still smelled. It smelled after having sat on the hard for 3 years. The surveyor recommended change all your hoses. That'll help, but marine heads always smell. So we bought hoses to change the hoses, but then I started thinking about what about another approach to the toilet. It costs about $20 here in Michigan to pump out every time you want to pump it out, and you'd like to rinse it and then pump it out a second time, which, if you're lucky, they won't charge you for the second pump out. But you also have to have a source of clean water to rinse out your holding tank. The previous owner had installed a viewing port so you could see how full your holding tank was, which sounds sort of gross, but the last thing I think you want is to overfill your holding tank and then go to pump it out and have effluent spewing onto your boat and onto the deck and onto you and onto the water. So there has to be a better way. Our previous boat had a camping toilet or a cassette toilet. It had self-contained water and a small holding tank with a seal. You'd open it up, you'd do your business, you'd flush it with some water from the reservoir, and then you sealed it, closed it again. It really depended on how tight your seal was. The longest we could go without dumping it and using it every day was about 5 days, but several of those days my husband peed off the boat. You all do it. You know it. And then we had to empty it because it was full. It always had a slight chemical smell. It wasn't unpleasant, but you could tell it was a smell coming from the head. So anyway, I started thinking about composting toilets. The problem with composting toilets is people don't leave their business in them long enough for it to actually compost. Most people who have a composting toilet talk about, well, we empty it every 3 days. And they empty it into their outdoor compost pile. Well, on a boat, you don't have the luxury of having an outdoor compost pile. So if you empty your composting toilet every 3 days, you're really not getting any composting. Well, then some people said, well, we can go up to 2 weeks in our RV before we have to empty our composting toilet. But even 14 days doesn't seem long enough to fully compost human waste, especially if the temperatures are not super warm, and especially if you don't get good aeration, if you're not chopping it up and turning it on a daily basis. And even then, if you're going to dump it on day 14, you still have uncomposted human waste in there from day 13, day 12, day 11, and probably day 10, even in the best of circumstances. So you're really just creating a poop holding tank, a dry holding tank for poop, which is an effective way of dealing with human waste in a confined area without attachment to a public sewage system. And I think they call these toilets dry holding tanks or dry toilets, which is basically how most people use their composting toilet. So I looked at the price of some of these dry compost toilets or dry holding tank toilets and some of these composting toilets and was shocked. It's $1,000 or more for a piece of fancy molded plastic. So I decided I was going to make my own and do an experiment and find out how much it actually holds, how easy it is to dispose of, and how much actual composting goes on inside a composting toilet. So here's my composting toilet. It is a 6-gallon bucket with an old toilet seat on the top. In order to use it, you have to take the toilet seat off because there's a lid on the bucket. The lid is critical to decreasing the odor. Once you take the lid off, you can appreciate a little bit of toilet odor. It's not horrible, but it definitely smells like a toilet. I looked up a lot of pictures of what the inside of a composting toilet looks like. All the pictures I saw were lies. This is what the inside of a composting toilet actually looks like. Sawdust, toilet paper, and little balls of poop. Uncomposted human excrement. Now, this is the accumulation of 2 weeks for me and my husband. At this point, I consider it full. I don't think I can lift this plastic bag out without tearing it. The plastic bag helps keep the inside clean so I don't have to scrub it. But we're going to try emptying it now. So here's our liner bag. It was a little bit difficult to get it to release from inside the the bucket, but it does hold a considerable amount of waste. I'm going to put it in a normal garbage bag because I don't trust this one staying intact. I feel much better now. But it is also clear that most of this is not quite as innocuous looking as pictures on the internet show. There are some still pretty solid clods of poop, basically packed in sawdust. And although we don't have a mixer to mix this up, I did shake it fairly regularly throughout the 2-week experimental period. And even if the stuff at the bottom does look like it might be starting to break down, the toilet paper certainly hasn't at all. And the last several days are still clods of human excrement. The good thing about the this style of composting toilet, even though it's really not composting sufficiently to just dump this in your garden, and I would only dump it in a dumpster in the dead of night when no one is observing me, disguised with regular boat trash. It does not smell once you put the lid on, does not smell at all, cannot even tell it's in here. When you open the lid, there is a slight odor. It's not unpleasant. It certainly is not woodsy or organic or like soil. You can tell it's probably poop and sawdust. It does smell better than a pit toilet, a lot better than a pit toilet. It does smell better than a porta-john, and it does smell better, I think, than our holding tank. And it does smell better than the chemical smell of the cassette toilet. But again, the cassette toilet, I only noticed the chemical smell briefly when you open the toilet and when we had a leak from it. And of course, leaking from a toilet is always a problem. So we did weigh our bag before we threw it out in the trash, and it weighed 25 pounds. Probably used 1/3 of a 5-gallon bucket of sawdust and the normal amount of toilet paper. I didn't count how many rolls we went through in the 2 weeks. And the bottom seemed very clean. The top of the lid did get a little sawdust on it, probably from my vigorous mixing attempts. And so I cleaned off the lid. I did clean out the inside of the toilet with bleach and water. And I am going to reload it with a new clean bag. And these are just regular trash can liners that we got at Costco. Things that I would do differently the second time around, use 2 bags, just in case. And as you can see, we don't have a urine diverter on here yet. What we were doing is using the regular toilet that's attached to the city sanitary system to pee, and then doing number 2 in the composting toilet. We also learned that if you are getting really comfortable and ready to take that poop, a lot of times you will just pee because you're used to peeing and pooping at the same time, especially for women. So you do have to develop some bladder control in order to successfully use a composting toilet, because you do not want the urine to get into the poop receptacle. The other drawback for our design is it takes a little while to use. You have to take the seat off, take the bucket top off, and like I said, the bucket top is extremely effective at preventing any leakage of smells. Then you have to put your seat back on, open it up, sit on your toilet, do your business, take the seat off, and put the lid back on. Ready for the next person. Additional design considerations before we can use this in our boat is something to keep it from sliding around, some sort of base that it sits into. Also attaching the seat to the wall so that maybe you could just fold the seat down when needed, fold it up when you don't need it. That way you don't have to take it off or open it up, take off the lid, put the lid on, close it. It would let you get to the toilet much faster if it's an urgency. The other thing is I do have to make a urine collector and have a separate urine collection bottle. And I think the most convenient and economical way is a 1 gallon milk bottle as your collection bottle. Easily obtained and easily disposed of. Two of the challenges of using a composting toilet on a boat is that you don't have a land-based compost pile to put your compost in because you're sailing. You certainly can't dump it in the water. That sort of defeats the whole purpose of not dumping human sewage into our nearshore waterways. If you're a certain distance from shore, I can't remember whether it's 3 miles or 12 miles, you can dump your waste into the open ocean, but most people don't usually sail that far away. So they're left with the problem of now disposing the waste that they've collected in their composting toilet. You can't sprinkle it in the local park. You can't put it in someone's garden because it is not composted. It'll take anywhere from 3 to 12 months for human fecal material to compost completely and be safe to spread, example. And I don't think most marinas want you dumping bags of basically poop packed in sawdust in their dumpster. The other problem is storage. In order to use a composting toilet, you need a media to help dry the poop and accelerate bacterial degradation or digestion. We used sawdust because we had some sawdust downstairs in our workshop. We used about half or a third of a bucket of sawdust with our 2-week experiment. Other things you can use are things like kitty litter, coconut husk fiber, and peat moss, none of which are easily available at marinas and which take up considerable storage space on a boat.